it says that God has actually been the one that has established the nations. And he has determined the time they would come into being and what the extent of their boundaries would be. You know, the Lord is over everything. He created this world, but it seems that part of God's creation plan is for nations. And I thank the Lord that somehow in his heart he had Canada. And that 150 years ago, it was Canada's time. It was the pre-appointed time for Canada to come into being. It's our birthday. And all the nations were sort of gathered together, and they were talking about what gift they would give Canada on its 150th birthday. And all the nations sort of shrugged their shoulders and said, what do you get someone that has everything? And I think that that's really speaks of Canada. We just about have everything. We are listed in the top countries, 2 or 3 countries in the world to live. And really, we've all hit the jackpot as far as living in a country that's worthwhile and good. We almost have everything. We don't quite have everything. Sort of illustrated by this story that I heard, that on the 6th day, God turned to the archangel Gabriel and said, today I'm going to create a land called Canada. It will be a land of outstanding natural beauty. It shall have tall, majestic mountains full of mountain goats and eagles and beautiful sparkling lakes, bountiful with bass and trout, forests full of elk and moose, high cliffs overlooking sandy beaches with an abundance of sea life, and rivers stocked with salmon. God continued, I shall make the land rich in resources so as to make the inhabitants prosper. I shall call these inhabitants Canadians, and they shall be known as the friendliest and most polite people on the earth. But Lord, asked Gabriel, don't you think you're being too generous to these Canadians? The Lord said to Gabriel, no, not really. Just wait and see the winters they're going to have. And so that truly is one of the downsides of being a Canadian. But we'll live with that with all the other blessings that we have. Why do we have so many blessings? Is it just by chance? Is it that our climate was so beautiful that we would have all these blessings? You know, the scripture says the blessings of the Lord makes rich. I believe that there is a blessing of the Lord upon our nation, that we cannot take credit to ourselves. We can't pride ourselves, look what we have done. I think there is just a rich blessing that rests upon Canada. And I believe that the genesis of that blessing comes from our forefathers who founded this nation when it first began to come into being. And people, obviously the indigenous people were already here, but then as Europeans came and as civilization grew and as it reformed into a nation, it was founded on Christian principles by Christians for the honor and glory of God. Now, not every nation has that. But this was the heart and the beginning of our nation. In 1533, Jacques Cartier, after sailing up the St. Lawrence and founding Montreal, wrote in his diary, this is what he said, we all kneeled down in the company of the Indians, and with our hands raised toward heaven, yielded our thanks to God. When I was going to school, they never taught us that when we were studying it. But the people that came here, for all the other aspects that they had a reverence for God. And when they actually came, they stopped and they knelt their knee and thank the Lord for it. David Thompson, who is an explorer, surveyor, and a map maker, wrote why he endured the hardship of exploration. He said, so that these impenetrable barriers may be traversed and the gospels be spread. The ones that charted this land and went out and pressed back the boundaries so that people could go. What were their motivation? This particular man said, I want to break through these barriers. I want people to come so that the gospel would spread. Sounds like one of us, wanting the gospel to go forth. Most amazingly is Sir Samuel Leonard Tilley, one of the fathers of Confederation. He came up with the name, the Dominion of Canada, at the conference at Charlottetown in PEI. His son wrote this later. This is what his son wrote. When the fathers of Confederation were assembled discussing the terms and conditions of Confederation and the drafting of the British North America Act, there had been considerable discussion the day before and many suggestions as to what the new United Canada should be called. And no conclusion had been reached. The discussion on the name stood over until the next day. The next morning, as was my father's custom, he read a chapter from the Bible. And that particular morning, he read Psalm 72. Now, this is what Sir Samuel Tilley read before he went to the conference that morning in Psalm 72. And I just put the verses up here. And it started in verse 1. Give the king your judgments, O God, and your righteousness to the king's son. He will judge your people with righteousness and your poor with justice. The mountains will bring peace to the people and the little hills by righteousness. He will bring justice to the poor of the people. He will save the children of the needy and break in pieces the oppressor. They shall fear you as long as the sun and moon endure. Throughout all generations he shall come down like rain upon the grass before mowing, like showers that water the earth. In his days the righteous shall flourish, and abundance of peace until the moon is no more. And then verse 8 particularly caught from the river to the ends of the earth. And even back 150 years ago, when that portion of Scripture was read, he thought, isn't that so descriptive of Canada? From sea, the Atlantic, to the Pacific, that they want